A musician is on the stage in a bar in New York. He is sitting on a chair and talking on the microphone while the audience is listening to him. The bar is half filled with people. The guy on the stage invites his friend Greta, sitting on the couch nearby, who is also a musician. Greta feels a bit shy and doesn't want to climb onto the stage. The guy is persistent and even includes the audience in cheering for Greta to sing her song. She finally comes up and starts playing and singing her song, which is, as she puts it, for all those who have felt lonely in a city. As she is playing, another guy, Dan, is closely observing her. She finishes playing the song, and the crowd gives her a well-deserved applause. Earlier that day, Dan, who is a music executive, wakes up at 7 a.m. and starts getting ready to start his day. He gets dressed, brushes his teeth, closes the curtains, and goes back to sleep for a while. Dan's phone is ringing, which wakes him up again, so he finally gets his things and leaves his apartment. As he is walking, he keeps dropping his things and seems to be a bit clumsy. In the car, Dan officially starts his day by listening to a bunch of audio recordings of the emerging artists. There are CDs of hip-hop, pop music, but Dan doesn't seem to enjoy any of them. By the end of the ride, he gets disappointed and throws them all out of the window. Dan takes a sip of some beverage and parks in front of the school, waiting for his daughter to arrive. His daughter, Violet, is surprised to see him, as her mother was supposed to pick her up. She gets in the car and asks about the unusual smell, and Dan assures her it's the smell of gasoline he spilled on his pants, and not of alcohol. Dan suggests various ideas to spend some time with his daughter, but Violet is not thrilled to hear them, because they sound childish. He stops the car in front of a building and tells Violet he has a meeting, and gives her a choice either to accompany him or wait in the car. They enter the building, and Dan tries to introduce Violet to the place, but she says she's been there many times before. At the meeting, a group of music experts are discussing the issue of adding audio commentary to some of the tracks, and Dan joins in on the conversation. Dan, who is described as the head of the record company by Saul, jokes about most musicians not having much to say and not needing the audio commentary. As Violet is in the hall, Dan is talking to Saul in his office. It becomes clear Saul is the current head of the company, even though he and Dan started the company together, and Saul fires Dan. Dan gets upset and reminds Saul how things were when they were first starting out, and how the company's motto was nurture and foster. Dan says he wanted to change how things were done in the music industry, and expresses regret for not being able to recognize this place anymore. Dan tries to take his list of contacts before he leaves, but Saul stops him. Dan changes his plan and tries to bring the artwork he bought while he was working in the record company, but the alarm system gets activated. Dan and Violet leave and Dan takes her to a bar, where he drinks a couple of beers and talks to his daughter. She accuses him of not even knowing her age, and reveals she's been seeing a psychiatrist for some time. Dan doesn't think his daughter needs a psychiatrist at this age, and he asks her not to tell her mom he's lost his job. When they are about to leave, Dan realizes he doesn't have any money to pay the bill, and asks his daughter for a couple of bucks, but she doesn't have it either. So Dan takes her out of the bar and they start running. The waiter follows them and soon catches up. He asks Violet not to look, and then slaps Dan a few times before releasing him. Dan drives Violet to her house, and she sarcastically thanks him for a normal day with her dad, and leaves the car. Dan follows her and enters her ex-wife's house. His wife wants to know how his work is going, and Dan tells her it's fine. Violet makes some food for her dad, who looks hungry to her and goes to her room. Dan and his ex-wife get into an argument about the way they are raising their daughter. They both sound bitter, and in a moment of resentment, Dan's ex-wife says that 5 minutes after he leaves, she and Violet will probably forget he was ever there. Meanwhile, Violet is in her room playing her electric guitar and trying not to hear what her parents are yelling at each other. Dan leaves the house and walks aimlessly for a while. He sits on a bench near the basketball field, drinks and cries. He is riding in the metro and listening to a man of faith talking about God and giving out flyers to people. Dan also gets a flyer and exits the metro. After a while, he walks into a bar from the beginning of this story. Dan orders a bourbon from the bartender and enjoys his drink for a while. Someone on the stage is announcing a new artist, Greta, who walks up to the stage and starts singing and playing the guitar. Once Dan hears Greta's voice, he turns his attention towards the stage. He gets up and looks at the other instruments on the stage, piano, drums, and imagines them being played by an invisible player. The melody merges with the song played by Greta into a lovely combination. It is as if Dan is editing Greta's original track in his mind. Greta finishes her song, and Dan is thrilled about what he just witnessed. Dan approaches her as she is sitting on a couch, and gives her his card. He says he would like to produce her music. Greta is reluctant to trust him completely about producing her music and taking advice from him. He focuses on her looks and tells her she is very pretty, and Greta answers that music is more about listening than about seeing to her. As they are speaking, another musician climbs on the stage. Greta is about to exit the bar and she runs into Dan again. This time, Dan tells her the whole truth about not signing a recording artist for years and being almost homeless and completely drunk from worry and trouble. He concludes his monologue by saying he was thinking about putting an end to himself when he heard Greta's song, and asks her for a beer, and Greta accepts. They go to another crowded bar, and end up drinking and talking. Greta is checking out Dan's biography on the internet and reading it out loud. She wants to know what happened to 2 Grammys he was awarded for his work, and Dan explains he pawned them for some money. Dan thinks Greta would be amazing with minor changes in her looks and with a great music video. He thinks she could be the new Norah Jones. They have some interesting discussions such as the topic of authenticity, and which artist is the most authentic in his expression. Greta suggests it's Bob Dylan, and Dan thinks he is all about image and being cultured, and they finally agree on Randy Newman being authentic. As they are about to leave the bar, Dan asks Greta to pay for the drinks as he is broke. Dan and Greta are outside, on the street. Dan wants to know what she is up to now. Greta says she has a plane to catch tomorrow and she wants to go back to the university. Dan asks her to stay for another day and drop by his record label. Greta promises she will think about it and give him a call the following day. Dan is curious to learn what happened to her since she is so eager to leave New York, but Greta doesn't reveal much. Greta is on her couch in her cozy apartment, drinking tea under the blanket and watching a video on her phone. It's a pretty cheerful video of her and some guy as they are driving in a car. The story goes back to when the video was made. Greta and Dave are in a car, looking happy and shooting videos of themselves. They are driving through the city and it's a lovely day outside. The car stops in front of a building, and a woman in charge of renting apartments welcomes them. As they are gathering their stuff from the car, a couple of fans approach Dave, and it turns out he's a famous music star after one of his projects turned into a big success. The fans are excited to run into him, and they wish to take a photo. Dave introduces Greta as his girlfriend and also a songwriter. They climb up to their new spacious apartment and move in. They spend some time playing table tennis and investigating the place. Greta asks Dave if it would be better if she came a bit later so he can settle in the apartment and his new project, and Dave answers he couldn't do this without her. They fall asleep on the bed. Dave and Greta go to the record label, where Dave is doing his new project. At the meeting, Dave is trying to explain to his new colleagues that Greta is not just his girlfriend but also his partner. Dave's boss doesn't seem to be excited about Greta participating, and she finally says she is mostly tagging along on this project. Greta is walking through the city and getting coffee for the group. Back at the studio, during the break, Greta gives Dave his special kind of tea that the samurai drank. Greta tastes it and doesn't like it. Dave tells her he needs to go to Los Angeles on business. Greta for a second believes she is also going with him. But then Dave clarifies it's only him and some of the guys from the studio. Greta seems slightly surprised, but quickly hides her feelings and goes to give the coffee to all the people in the studio. A guy is playing guitar on the street, near the park, with a lot of passion. His guitar case is open in front of him. He realizes Greta is coming from the other direction and gets really excited. They seem to know each other from before and haven't seen each other for a while. As they are walking down the street, Greta tells him about the news in her life and how her boyfriend is now recording for a famous record label. Greta's friend takes her to his small apartment full of instruments and CDs. He explains the record labels are giving out musical equipment, and he could almost start recording in his apartment. Greta finds a CD of her boyfriend, and she and her friend sit down and talk about the album cover. Greta jokes how she and Dave were once partners and now she is the girlfriend of Dave Cole. A bit later, Greta is watching an old video of her and Dave. They are in their room. Greta is sitting by the piano and Dave is playing the guitar. There is a notebook with lyrics and notes in front of Greta, and she is singing while Dave is playing the instrument. Greta wants to know if Dave likes the song, and he answers he likes it so much that he hates her a bit for it. Greta is still unsure about the title of the song. Back to the present moment, Greta and Dave are in their new apartment, in the kitchen. Dave is pouring some wine and telling Greta about his trip to Los Angeles. He reveals he wrote a new song and asks if Greta would like to hear it. Greta is excited to hear it and Dave plays it on his phone. Greta is listening for a while, but suddenly her mood changes and she gets upset and slaps Dave. Dave first says what's wrong with you, but then comes clean and admits Greta has almost a sixth sense and can read his mind. Greta wants to know who the song is for, and Dave admits it's for Mim, one of the girls working in the record label. Greta gets shaken after hearing this, and particularly after Dave says he wants to see this relationship through. Greta packs her belongings and goes to the Botanic Garden, where her friend Steve is playing on the street. He immediately realizes something is wrong and hugs Greta. Steve takes Greta to his home and sets a bed for her on the couch. She still seems to be in shock and doesn't talk much. A bit later, Greta is on her laptop trying to book a flight to go home, and Steve asks her to come with him to a gig. Because she is hurting from her failed relationship, Greta gets annoyed at his suggestion and insults Steve. They soon make up and Greta comes along to the gig. The same scene happens, where Steve introduces his friend on the stage, and Greta reluctantly accepts and starts playing her song. The following morning, Dan is in his apartment, sleeping on the couch, and gets a call from Greta, who wants to know if he is serious about signing her and producing her music. Dan assures her he is. He goes to the apartment of his ex-wife and lets her know he has finally found an artist he wants to record, and that can bring change to their record label. His ex-wife is upset he is still entering her home like he lives there, but Dan ignores her words and takes a shower in the bathroom. Dan and Greta meet to go to Dan's old record label. Greta plays a song in Saul's office, but Saul doesn't seem to be impressed. He thinks Greta has a bit of an attitude. Dan is trying to persuade him to record the track in their company, but Saul says it's the other way around. The musicians usually send them demo tapes. Afterwards, Dan and Greta sit in a cafe to have a cup of coffee. Dan comes up with an idea to record a whole album outside. He thinks they don't need a studio to do that. They make a detailed plan of recording Greta's songs all over New York and capturing the essence of the city. Soon after, the preparations start, and Greta and Dan start gathering a team of people they will work with. Dan wants to find a younger producer, but Greta insists he should be the one to produce the album. Dan also contacts Music Academy students to play for the album. He tells them he can't pay them right away but offers them a good deal. The rehearsals start and Dan is directing each musician and giving them instructions. They are in need of more musicians, so Dan keeps going around looking for them. He approaches a piano player who is working at a dance school, who likes the idea and immediately quits his old job. Dan takes Greta to one of his friends, and a famous rap musician, in a fancy mansion. The rapper is there with his whole hip-hop crew, and they are delighted to see Dan. They make some rhymes and lines while talking to Dan and Greta. The group goes outside to swim in the pool and enjoy the conversation, and Dan tells Troublegum about their plan to record the album outside. Troublegum likes the idea, and Dan explains they are in need of musicians, a bass player and a drummer. Greta adds they don't have the money to pay them, and Troublegum offers to pay for it, as Dan has done so much for him in the past and he owes him a lot. The team is at their first recording location, in a small side alley. They are about to start shooting and recording, but a group of kids are playing nearby and making a lot of noise. Dan offers to give them each a couple of bucks to stop making the noise. The children bargain with him and they eventually agree and make a deal. They continue recording the song and Greta really gives her best, as well as the rest of the team. Dan finds a way to include the kids as a choir. Dan takes Greta to their next location, the Empire State Building, and shows her the lovely view. They discuss whether the location is too loud but agree on it being perfect. Afterwards, Dan asks Greta to accompany him in picking up his daughter at the school. Greta immediately makes a connection with Violet, and they talk about the cute guy at school, and how Violet might get him to ask her on a date. Dan, Violet, and Greta sit on a bench to eat ice cream, and Greta gives fashion advice to Violet. She tells her she could change her style a bit to appear more mysterious, and offers to take her shopping after that. Dan drives Violet home. She had a great time, and Greta asks her to join in to play on her album. Dan is a bit unsure about including her daughter in the project, and says he needs to think about it, as it's all happening so fast. Dan and Greta go and have lunch at a restaurant. They are discussing how their day with Violet went, and Greta suggests Dan should see more of Violet. She doesn't understand why he left that life. Dan gets upset, leaves the money at the table and storms out. Greta goes after him and apologizes for upsetting him. Dan has an emotional outbreak and says her age is finally showing, as she was being judgmental in the restaurant when really, she doesn't have a clue about what it's like to be in a marriage for 18 years. Dan says it was his wife who had an affair, and wanted to leave him and go with another man. Dan starts walking down the street but Greta runs after him and hugs him. They park in a place with a nice view and Dan opens up about his marriage. He says she met a singer and they both agreed on breaking their marriages to be with each other. But the singer changed his mind last minute and disappeared from her life. Dan was still living in the house at the time and didn't take things well. Greta and Dan go back in Dan's car, and he tells her about the splitter, a musical device that enables two people to listen to music at the same time. Dan wants to know what is on Greta's playlist, so they walk through the city and listen to music on Greta's phone. Greta comes up with an idea to go dancing somewhere while listening to the playlist, and Dan takes her to a nightclub. Afterwards, they sit on the city steps and Dan shares how he likes music, because it makes the ordinary everyday moments special. Both of them are sitting down and enjoying the view of a crowded city at night. They end up the conversation by saying this whole adventure has been full of moments resembling pearls, meaning valuable and rare. Dan says it's sometimes necessary to travel over a lot of strings to reach pearls. Greta and Dan arrive at Steve's flat, and Steve lets them know Greta's ex-boyfriend just won a musical award. Steve plays the live broadcasting on his laptop, and they all watch Dave's speech. Greta is surprised to hear the speech, and feels like she doesn't really know her ex-boyfriend who she spent 5 years with. Dan explains her boyfriend is now a rock star, and all rock stars fall in love with the road, the chicks and the rock star wild lifestyle. A bit later, Steve and Greta are drinking in his kitchen, and Greta says, "I've loved you like a fool." Steve tells her that could be a line of a really good song, and tells her to write it down. He gives her a pen and a paper, and Greta writes down the words. She and Steve decide to record it as well. Steve is playing the piano and Greta is following with the guitar, and singing into her phone tapped as a microphone. While they are recording the song, Greta gets very emotional. Greta dials Dave's phone number but he doesn't pick up. Instead, his answering machine gets activated, and Greta sends him the recorded song. The next day, Dave listens to the message in Greta's song, and seems to be shaken by it. In the following days, the team is recording songs all over the city, in the streets and in the subway, which is prohibited, so they need to run away from the police. Later that day, they arrive at the rooftop where the team prepares for another shooting. Dan's wife Miriam and their daughter Violet arrive as well. Miriam is sitting in the corner and observing the scene. Violet says she is unsure whether she will play at all or not. It depends on how she feels during the day. Greta and the musicians are teasing Dan and cheering for him to also play the bass with his daughter, but Dan keeps refusing and saying he's a producer. Greta gets a voicemail from Dave, so she asks for a 5-minute break to go and listen to the message. Dave says he received her song and would like to see her as he is in the town. Greta goes back and they start the rehearsal that prolongs long into the night. Violet is next to Steve, who is in charge of the laptop, and at one point, Violet gets up and starts playing the bass guitar. The sound of the band is diverse and consists of various instruments such as the cello, drums, violin, all intertwined to support Greta's voice. Once the song is finished, the whole band cheers and applauds Violet, who has done an amazing job of playing the bass guitar. Everyone goes to the party in Steve's apartment, where they celebrate after hard work, and play the I Dare You Not to Dance to This Song game. Dan spends some time with Violet and Miriam, and then takes them home. Dave and Greta finally meet, and Dave opens up about his life in the previous months. He admits he broke up with Mim shortly after their relationship began. They walk through the city and sit on stairs, where Greta plays her album to Dave. He loves it, the ambient sound and what Dan has done with it. Dave also talks about his album called On the Road, and Greta jokes about it having the same name as Kerouac's book. They sit on a bench and Dave wants to know Greta's opinion about his album. Greta is first reluctant to reveal her thoughts, and finally she says the songs were lost during the production process and they need a remix to get them fixed. Dave believes this conversation is not really about the songs as much as it is about their previous relationship, and he invites Greta to his concert. Dan gives a copy of the finished album to his daughter Violet, and after that he goes with Greta to Saul's office, where they get a good offer for the album, and everyone thinks they've done a great job. Dan and Greta say goodbye to each other on the street, and jokingly make plans of recording a similar album dedicated to other cities around the world. Greta gets a message from Dave, reminding her to drop by at his gig, and she arrives in time to listen to him play a song she wrote. He asks her to join him on stage, but Greta enjoys the music for a while, and then leaves to ride on her bicycle across the city. Dan and his ex-wife Miriam are on good terms again, and they are sitting on a bench listening to music with Dan's splitter device, and Greta is riding into the night smiling at life.